time those who are here.
You'll make your announcement. Yeah. To bring a little contemporary significance to our study of the Holocaust, I thought you might be interested. There's going to be the History Club sponsoring a speaker from Amnesty International in 2 weeks from today on April 21st at 12 noon in room 2083 in Stevenson Hall. And what we're thinking of doing is starting a group on campus next semester. We're interested in letting you know now what Amnesty is doing and how you can become involved individually or in a group. And we're looking forward to getting some names of people that are interested in starting a group next semester and preventing Holocaust from happening and doing whatever we can, no matter how minimal, in helping prevent Holocaust.
You repeat that.
Yes, it's through 2083 Stevenson Hall. Yes.
Well, this all has great significance because what we learned from the lecture series is precisely what we need to apply today, and that is the case in this situation, that we indeed participate actively in preventing a future genocide, which starts precisely with the persecution of innocent individuals or people who simply have different ideological convictions. And we need to do something about it, and we need to get involved. So it's not just what we understand, but how we act upon what we understand is exceedingly important. And Amnesty International, I've been a part of that for many decades, is precisely one of their organizations which we really should be very close to. Because of their experience and because of their understanding, we try to develop throughout all the lecture series.
Channel 9, KQED, is going to show up this month. It will be presented on 2 nights, Sunday, April 26th from 30 to 11:30, and Monday, April 27th from 7 p.m. to 7 p.m. And it will be repeated entirely on Channel 32 starting at noon on Monday, May 3rd. And also Channel 9 is going to have a film called Genocide on Thursday night, April 30th at 9:30. And this is the film that won the Academy Award in 1982 for Best Film. It's narrated by
Thank you. I'm Robert Harris. I'm president of the Alliance of the Study of the Holocaust. It's the community-based organization that is co-sponsoring this lecture series, together with what used to be called the Faculty Holocaust Committee, but now we can call it the Sonoma State University Study for Holocaust Center. Holocaust Study Center. John Steiner is the director. Let me call your attention to our schedule. The class will meet in 2 weeks, April 21st. It's not a lecture. Those of you who are from the public who wish to join this discussion are welcome, but this is for those enrolled. So the next lecture will take place in 3 weeks. That'll be the 28th of April. We start on the third part of the lecture series. That is the outcomes. And we have a real treat. Professor Martin Blaze will talk on the profound impact that the Holocaust has had on modern European literature, and I urge all of you to plan to attend. He gives a very... one will be Dr. Connellan Feig. She is a renowned Holocaust scholar, but she is a very impassioned speaker, and I think it'll be very interesting to hear her. And the other person who will be on the program that you may be interested in hearing is one that Dr. Olinger looked for last week, Otto Springer, a rescuer who in Czechoslovakia was responsible for rescuing a number of Jews during the Nazi occupation. I will pass these flyers out so that you can have reminders, because it's a long ways to the 26th, Sunday 26th of, is that right, 26th of April? Yeah. All right. Now, today we have a very interesting topic. It's deals with the psychology of survival in ghettos, camps, and in hiding. And the man who's going to bring you this talk himself was in hiding. He was born in Lodz, Poland, and his family was escaped capture, but was in underground hiding for 2 years and 2 months. He did his doctoral studies at UCLA in applied behavioral sciences, which incorporates both psychology and sociology. He has taught at universities, and he's currently a management consultant. Will you welcome Hirsh Frankiel?
Thank you, Robert. I'm very grateful to Robert Harris for what he has done here. I've followed some of these lectures over the last 4 years, and with the patience and with the energy, the persistence, he has developed this program to the point now that the university has established it. And and I think some of the work that's coming here, including the videotaping at this time around, is going to say to Moses Rosenberg. He resisted the forces that we did, and this talk is about resistance. But his form of resistance was not to survive, but to choose to die. On a certain day when he had a choice whether to go into hiding, he said that he would wish to go to wherever they were destined. It was fairly certain that it was the extermination camps. And by dying in this way, by going that way, he performed a great heroic Jewish act, so not by the heroism of our society. Thank you, Carol. Yes, some friends are reminding me to speak up, and I appreciate that. And if others want to speak, do that. That'll help. I'll drift off, and they'll help, and you can help. What Moses Rosenberg did is called Kiddush Hashem, and it's institutionalized in Judaism for 3,000 years as a practice of asserting Judaism. He died in November of 1942. What I'm going to do for about 10 minutes, speak about myself, tell you about the background I bring to this topic. Then I'd like to spend some time, 10 minutes or less or more. Thank you. Yes. And what I'd like to do is spend 10 or 15 minutes asking your thoughts and your questions, so that in the material that I bring to you, I can incorporate and respond to you. And after that, if there's still time, we can have a discussion. So I'll start with questions and then late. Talk about myself, because they'll give you something of a target. Thank you again. Yes. I'm getting lots of help at this point. I'm glad. Okay. I was born in Lodz, Poland in 1935. So in 1939, in September, when the Germans invaded Poland, I sat by a radio and remember that. My memories go back till about the time I was about 3 years old. I was 4.5 years old. And the people in the apartment house, a house of about 50 families, 20 of them or so were Jewish, had prepared layer beds and bedding and food in the basement because there was some expectation that Germans would invade. That was my introduction to the war. I heard the radio announcing that the planes were flying in our direction. And sort of a fear gripped me and an excitement. I mean, I wanted to stay by them and go down into the basement. In a few days later, and I think September 3rd, they entered Łódź. Within that time, within a day or so, before or after, I don't remember, my father escaped. He left, as many men, especially Jewish men, left expecting that the Germans would somehow want to impress them or gather them into labor forces or put them into some sort of camps. And he went eastward to Russia. And again, many men, I don't know whether Polish, but Jewish people who were men who weren't in the army, moved eastward. And he didn't join us till 1941. Our family, my father had 4 brothers. My mother had 4 sisters and 3 brothers. They all had been married and had children. During the ensuing 6 years, family of about 70, there's uncles, aunts, and cousins, about 60 people died. We survived, and one cousin survived, and my aunt survived. So what had happened was, very thorough extermination, slaughter of our family. But that thoroughness represented the slaughter of all Jews in Eastern Europe and most Jews in Western Europe too. I knew about the war because within days my mother was concerned and restricted my movement. Within months, early in the winter of 40, just been told the ghetto of Łódź was closed. In the middle of that winter, we packed some of our belongings and moved from Łódź to another town. And just before the ghetto of that town, Tomaszow, was closed, we moved again. I'll go into the details of that later. In fact, that'll be much of my talk, is just how we moved over and over again, escaped, hid, either in the ghettos or in villages, in our ultimate hiding place, and just what meaning it had to me, and also what I'd read in the literature and from speaking to others. I was 12 in 1947. The war ended. I was 10 years old at that time. When I was 12, I came to the United States. I didn't realize that, nor did other people with whom I associated. I was severely traumatized. That trauma, that the effects of that are present with me, but they blocked my relation to the Holocaust, to those memories, to any of the feelings, for 35 years. Thank God for the recovery that has happened during the last 5 years, or has begun. When I was 47, I made some great steps forward. I had conversations with a Robert Hall psychiatrist who lives in West Marin. Yes, thank you, Bert. I opened myself. I became more aware of my own deadness, of my zombiness, through a great gathering that happened in 1982. I had been getting ready to come out of this closet, but in 1942 there was a gathering in Washington in April, about this time, a little bit later, and there were some 15,000 survivors who had come together. All my experience with survivors during the previous 35 years was that I would experience pain, physical pain. I mean, I'd get stomach cramps, headaches. I'd want to get out. I did get out of my parents' home. I didn't realize how much how I judged them, and how that reflected in myself the kind of pain that was present in their talk as I listened to it, and in their own experience as they expressed themselves. When I came to Washington in 1982, 83 rather, people celebrating life and being there and engaging in a great performances, in great stagings. There's an auditorium in Washington, I forget the name of it, but it holds many thousands of people, and it was filled. There was a grand video set up there that was the stage and the audience, out to the audience. President Reagan stood up, I think, or was it Nixon then? The president stood up and addressed the audience in really congratulatory terms and with appreciation and with some understanding. And then there was a great gathering of a hall in which these 10,000 people gathered occasionally and in it sometimes for meals. And there was a great excitement, a life. Well, this was the first sense after all these years that I had anything that I could gain from, that I could give to, that I wanted to relate with. So that was some of the experience. What happened in those 35 years, and between 47 and 82? I studied chemistry in Berkeley. I worked in rocket propulsion, into vehicles that could be used for space shots, so converting missiles into some peaceful uses. I worked on electronic defense of the United States. Then I studied social sciences and took a Ph.D. in applied behavioral sciences at UCLA. I worked on conflict resolution process, on personal growth, especially personal growth in the work environment in some societies. I think of it now, I was trying to make connection with a society that was dead for me and somehow wanting to make contact with with some living society. That was a time that I was less conscious of how much I missed and how much of a loss I feel and felt. I taught at some universities, in California at Stanford for a while, and I consulted to organizations about inner peace, personal development, and about organizational growth. Thank you. Toward the end of that time, around the late 1970s, I became an artist. I was working in sculpture and metal, and sometimes with pastels. That's still my interest. During that time, I experienced a lot of personal crises. I had one child, and I was divorced. My son is 30. I was married again, 2 children. I'm divorced, a daughter of 23 and a son who's 19. I'm married again, and we're happily married. And thanks to my wife's support, I think I can stand here and face some of the things that I have to face within me to do that. Career crises, many moves, many addresses, changes in professions, 3. The latest work that I've done is work with, for a month now, with adults who are profoundly retarded. They cannot speak, and they have limited abilities to take care of themselves. And it's another opportunity that has come to me to serve us. Before that, it had to do with converting missiles, spacecraft vehicles. So this is what I bring. One of the things that I particularly, I think, can add, or we can discuss, is about 15 years ago, I decided to study, I became fascinated with the thought that the Jewish people had survived for 3,500 years. Only 1,000 years of that time did they have a land. Now, there isn't, in local studies, any such phenomenon that exists. And what was the power? What's the energy? What built and what maintains the ability of Jews to function as a country now, and for all those 2,500 years that they had no land? Occasionally they had it. I formulated the question in those terms, and then I said, what is there in Judaism? And being a psychologist with strong phenomenological inclinations, that's the way I answer a question, is by getting into it. I had to accept and try to do what observant Jews do, or what Jews do, and eventually became to observant Jews, because that's the strain in Judaism that has carried Jews forward for it, and that has had the continuity. Other movements disappeared. So that's also something that I bring to this discussion. Now, my questions to you: what is it that you want to know about survival, about my hiding, Also, what I've done in the last 6 months, 9 months, is I've gotten in, I have been in touch with Gerald Jampolsky, a psychiatrist who is very much concerned with healing of trauma and work in national, international issues of peace. Presently he's in Central America this week. He's been in Russia and in China and teaching. And now there's a group that's grown to perhaps 15, 20 people associated, survivors, come and gather in this home each month for an evening and examine, try to reflect and recognize the things that we have in common and the things that we have that are unique. I bring some. Mhm. How do you see that we will have to hide? Just what? Any images? Uh-huh. So, questions, issues? Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. Anybody? Uh-huh. How did the wartime experience reflect on my identity and the things that I did? Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? Yes. Mm-hmm. Me psychologically? Affected the children and my relation to them. Yes. Let's go. No, let's move on. Okay. Any other? Yes. Uh-huh. Those people who were indifferent or hostile, participating in the persecution. Any others? Yes.
When you relate your experiences, does it make any alteration in the actual memory?
Mm-hmm. Well, how is my memory changing?
Well, do you notice that it's an
Uh-huh.
alteration
Okay. What effect is talking about?
what reactions you came up with power?
Mm-hmm. Source of power of Jewish survival over centuries. And we pass on to our children. No? Yes. Okay. Okay. My religious orientation, my family's. Okay. How many people here are Holocaust survivors? Uh-huh. And how many people are Jewish in their family, their parents?
How many had their families in Europe killed?
Yes.
By the grace of God, I was here.
Uh-huh.
The slave was killed.
How many had relatives in Europe who were killed? Seems about as many people as there are Jewish here. I mean, a little small. Okay, let's get to it. That's a tall order, but anyway, somehow I'm going to try to do the best I can by all these questions and also the material that I've got here. Position that I've developed after spending these 15 years of becoming more and more religiously observant and orthodox. Thanks for reminding me about this. And I'll just, in a digested way, try to say what that view emerging, and it's going to be changing over time. God is present in the world and directs all events in individual lives. And that works. That's just my present understanding of that, my sense. That's how I view it. And I'm not a rabbi, though I've spent time with some rabbis. And the way some of that works is that in any one act, 10 different consequences can come about, and they're all of them right for each one of us. Whether this is God, a person, I think that's a little strange, difficult to imagine. But somehow the process of the universe, the laws of the higher laws of the universe work that way. That's how I view it. And somehow, in that way, the Jewish people, some 3,000, 3,500, 2,500, 2,000, 1,500, 1,000 years ago, were given a mission. And it was articulated by God-inspired men, by the prophets, by the sages, by the later writers, by the most recent great universally recognized Jewish figures in Jewish thought. They were given a land in which to exercise, to try to articulate, to form that vision, a temple in which they could develop and crystallize it. They were given the diaspora, the scattering belt, that Khmelnytsky's massacres, where thousands in Eastern Europe were slaughtered, and that the Holocaust is another direction from, that's my radical view, that is, it takes a lot of discussion to develop it. The Holocaust is, for Jews, in Jewish terms, God's kind redirection of what the religious, the spiritual direction, the spiritual force in Judaism should take. He does things as gently as he can, and it took a great deal of force to move. This is a radical thought, and somehow maybe I'll be able to justify how I came to it, but it's so the Holocaust was a spiritual event. It was a spiritual redirection. It was guidance for us. Last Friday I sat in a gathering of 30, 40 people, and most eminent scholar and rabbi in Southern California who was visiting the area said, we shouldn't ask why God did this. So I'm being a little bit of a renegade from formal positions by asking, what is it that we're supposed to learn from it? But the power, and wanted to answer some part of that question, some of the power of Judaism has been that we each come with, in each generation, the value, the ethic in Judaism is that we should try to learn from the texts, learn from our understanding of our experience, but to study Torah, that is to apply that which is into the framework of the thought of others who preceded us by hundreds and thousands of years, to study the text. And so now the question is, do we want to, can we? Are there some people who are willing to study the question of what is it that we're to learn from this in the spiritual terms? Because Judaism has a spiritual quality in the sense that most of Western civilization is descended from the spiritual thought that existed in Judaism, as well as from the intellectual and practical thought that was Rome and Greece, Greco-Roman Jewish civilization. So that's the question that remains for me, and that's the one that I'm spending some of my time in thinking about. How did leaving that and just moving on to my particulars and then moving back to the generals, how did my family survive? In 1939, I was in Poland, in Łódź. We escaped. And we escaped in such a way that we moved from a city where my mother had a sister, another small family, sister, her husband, and one child. And we moved from there. But where did we move to? Where did we run from this large industrial city? We moved to a smaller city that had two of my father's brothers and one of her sisters and family. So our path in survival was to move somewhere closer. That was one of the threads that appears over and over as we move on. And some of that sense will appear as I try to illustrate it with having the sensitivity that when you're very threatened, or one is very threatened, we were very threatened, we became very, very careful to pick up, to read, to what would be called, probably best described in parapsychological terms, to extrasensory ways. Just what's safe and who's right and who do we connect to, where do we move? So that later on we made decisions that didn't move us closer to a network, but we used some strange sense. One illustration of how my father functioned, how my mother, and how I, still I think rather sensitive in these ESP terms, is that in 1941, in January or February, he was living in that part of Poland controlled by the Russians, and they were systematically deporting people who were not natives to that region into Siberia. On a certain night, my father said, "It's time to leave." They exchanged one or two letters, and he knew where we were in Tomaszów. And so he packed his bag, and that night he went down to the railroad station. It was later that night that the NKVD, the Russian police that was doing this selection, extermination, shipping, searched through his apartment building and shipped all the people who were out of that, not in that region. He shipped them. Somehow he read, one of my uncles gave him some materials, some fabric which he was able to trade, and he was by profession a dyer and textile, wool, for wool dyeing. And so we survived there. We survived there for some months. But late in 1941, late in the middle of that summer, I think, we felt it was time to get out. We somehow read, we just felt we had to go. And again, that sense of we've got to move, though it doesn't make very good sense. No one, well, the town had perhaps 10,000 Jews at that time. Maybe a few families moved out, but we did. And we went out into villages, into the countryside. There were no Jews there. We left the family, we left the network, we went out alone. My father hired a small wagon and took out his dice, the tools of his trade. And we went to Wonketka, a little village. And within a few days, the ghetto of Tomaszów was closed. Barbed wire was put around, there was no way of exiting. And the Germans started then the practice of bringing in Jews from smaller towns, from little villages, into the other larger concentrations, ghettos, and ghettos which were closed. That sense of just when to move right, he knew. And as I reflected about all this and the other ones, and I guess I'm speaking my conclusions before, but you can sense them out yourself, is that there was for us, and there is for the people with whom I've spoken, people who've been in the group with Jampolsky with me, and things I've read, and people whose writing of their survival is read, is that there's a great will that's beyond the will of intellectual will and beyond the emotional will, like, you have a tantrum, you really want to do something. Well, there is another level of reality, a will to survive. In some way, my father, my mother, in some way we were going to evade the fate that was awaiting us. I don't know quite how to put that except in the way I've said it. Maybe there will be some questions that will make it clearer later. But I'm trying to answer these, and then we'll take on more questions. We went to Wonketka. I spent the summer there. I was a 6-year-old boy then. I remember with pain that it was the fall harvest, and I'd gone out to the field with a farmer wagon and with other kids who were in that village, and we were riding back, and it was a glorious sunny fall day, and they said, "Get your Jew ass off this hay, the cows won't eat it." And it's been 45 years since, but it really got me, because I felt very free there in that village. I felt our land. I used to go into the woods to pick mushrooms. What happened in December of 1941 is that somehow the Gestapo had learned that there were Jews in that village, that we were the Jews in that village, and there were Jews in other villages. And a police car came down. My mother saw the dust and the road, told my father to get out, and he escaped into the nearby woods. They came and asked her, "Where's the man that they're supposed to be with here?" And she said, "He's a workman, he's gone, I don't know where he is." The Gestapo took me and my mother to the nearest town. That town wasn't Tomaszów, where my father's brothers lived and where he was born. It was Opoczno. And we were deep again back into the network, because Opoczno was the town that grew up in. Her father had built a house there, a great big stone house. In some way, the way that people were going back to the closest, to the safest place, 3 of her sisters had gathered there. 1 of her brothers was there. Now she was there, brought there by Gestapo. She was in the Gestapo prison, so was I. And as on that evening, that night, I don't remember the details. That's one that to go back to. I remember some details of many things, like the trip on the hay wagon. Someone who was part of the administrative structure of the Jewish community. At that time, it had grown because Germans had been gathering Jews in to about 10,000 people. And Mr. Brenner was in the Gestapo building, and he was a member of the town committee, but somehow he wanted to deny that he knew my mother. She persuaded him that he should take me. She didn't want me to spend time there. And he did, and took me to my grandfather's house. That's how my grandfather knew about my mother, me, and my father. My father still was somewhere in the woods. And I told that Mr. Brenner got 3,000 Polish currency zloty. So that's how I escaped the Gestapo. There was some other payment, transfer made, and my mother got out 9 days later after she was taken in. There was another man that was taken in at that time from another village he was hiding. She tells me that he was shot, and she tells me specifically how. I didn't ask her how she knew, but he was shot in the mouth, she said. And those are the and escaped and joined us. It was important at that time to be somehow occupied in the service to the German government. And so he bought himself, or the family did, the work permit so that he could work as a quarry worker with 200 other Jewish men from the town, or several hundred Jewish men. The conditions were difficult, and the people were that courageous to resist in that way that they stopped work one day. And next morning when they gathered to go to the work, the Germans shot 200 of them. And as to sort of impress their power and just to subdue any form of resistance, I think it was a Friday, my father escaped. I don't know just how. They mounted a machine gun on a jeep and took several soldiers on the car and drove down through the streets and shot anyone who was on the street. My grandfather had built this great house, I think I mentioned. He also built a deep cellar, 3 stories deep. He had a soda-making plant, and the refrigeration wasn't well developed in the 30s in Poland. So what he did is harvested ice in the winter and stored it in the cellar in the summer between layers of straw, and that's how he kept the soda pop cold as it went to different places to the store. So he sold ice as well as soda. We were, the family, everyone, as we had heard the sounds, and I knew that there was I knew the terror in many, when that action, that's what these things were called, when the Germans were going around the town shooting people. I feel it. It came back to me 3-4 months ago. I'll tell you about just how interesting that was. We all went down into that 3-story cellar. Nobody was going to find us down there. I mean, we hoped. Someone tramped through the house. We heard, but they didn't find any up there. We were downstairs. So that was another of those ways that we survived. It wasn't our choice. It wasn't our sensitivity. It wasn't our ESP sense. It was just God provided with circumstance. There was the cellar for us. As soon as things seemed a little quiet, or as my own inner sense said, it's time to check this out, I sneaked away from the family, climbed up the stairs, and peeked through the cracks of the fence that was going on outside. And what I saw was a hay wagon drawn by horses, heaped full of bodies, bleeding. Blood was running down onto the street. And my mother found out I wasn't down there, so she found me, grabbed me, and roughly got me back down there for more time. What happened last December, I think it was, so I was out walking in Lucas Valley Road early in the morning, about 6 o'clock, and I had a strange smell. And I knew that it was the smell of human blood. I'd never smelled human blood. I'd never been in surgery or anything like that. I called Michael Thaler, who's connected with these programs. Will be, I think, after once. He's a surgeon, physician at UC Medical, and one of the brilliant people who have come out of the Holocaust, doing liver research, blood. Anyway, Michael Thaler, I called Michael and said, "Does human blood have a smell?" He said, "Of course. Very distinct smell." So the memories come back, and they come back in very very, it's sort of like a gift. I mean, that's when there's a certain time that you're ready to know it. Let me go on with what happened, because we went into hiding, and I hadn't gotten to that yet. Time's going on. In the summer of '42, we had heard some kind of reports that there were labor places, places, and that there were places where many people were dying, and it wasn't good to get out. I mean, it wasn't good to go wherever the Germans were going to take you, but if there's no choice, that's where you've got to go. Somehow my parents, I don't know if any other family of the 10,000 Jewish people in the village town of Opochno, there may have been others, I just don't know of it, got out, who had a compassionate role. It may have been in just providing some food, or helping at some point out of the hundreds of choices between death and life that you make during these years, that we made because the selection system was so thorough that you had to go through it many times. And anyone who survived he didn't make one choice, he made dozens, hundreds, or God made hundreds. Both he and God made hundreds of choices. Well, we reached a family. Their name is Vrubel. I've just been writing about what I'm doing here. To Stanislav Vrubel was at that time in his early 20s. There was a mother, Karolina, and a father, an older man, much older. She was a devout Christian woman, very much got Moses Rosenberg's children, and hide them out for a few weeks, or however long this war was going to last. Thank you, Bernie. And in November of 1942, in early November, there was a barbed wire fence around the ghetto. Somehow my parents sensed that it was time now to move. And with an allusion to some mystical Jewish terms, which says that the groom will follow the bride. And God's presence on earth is the bride. So that was his response. I remember it. I sat at the table. I was trying to draw last night with my son, my 7-year-old boy, who was the same age that I was then. In fact, we talk about it. What that house looked like, the house that my grandfather had built, what that table looked like at which we talked. And at some time in our conversations in the evening, when we do these things, we'll talk more about all that happened and what his grandfather was like and what I remember of him. What my 6-year-old, when he was 6 years old, almost 7, he's going to be 7 in 4 weeks, he was riding in the car with one of the boys, with a son of one of the students here, Carol. And I overheard the conversation, and he was explaining to Eli just what the Germans did to Jews in Poland, that they sent them to places where they were killed and then burnt. He knows that. So what's the consequence? Someone else asked, what's the consequences of that? How I assess that. I'll try to get to that and talk about that and how he came to know as much as he does. My 30-year-old son doesn't know very many of these details. Neither does my 23-year-old son. My 18-year-old daughter, I didn't know how much she was taken by all this. I haven't lived at that, when she was 18, when she was 16. She and I hadn't lived with her in her home for 10 years, 12 years. She asked me to come down to Santa Clara. She and her theater group in high school had decided to perform Anne Frank. And just how Anne Frank is related to the past is as close as one can find a parallel. She was going to play Anne Frank, which was, at 18, she was going to try to get into my skin. So that's That's some of the connections that the children make. I had some influence, obviously, but I just don't recall how much and how. And what she asked me to do in Santa Clara is to spend a few hours an evening with a whole theater group, giving them as much of a sense of what it was to be in a hiding place. The hiding place that we had at the Rubels. My parents and I and my father went back, and on the day of the extermination, the day that the people were driven out of their houses and driven toward the central marketplace and taken out to the trains and shipped off, he was in town, and he tried to save the rest, some more members of the family. And he went down, and he had a hiding place in the ghetto, and he went down to see that the path was clear. When he came back, the Germans had swept through again and gotten my aunt and her children out of the hiding place. So people survive now, why did my father not be there at that time? Minutes, half hour, something. Well, many people say that's chance. And other people more psychologically oriented may say, well, that's his ESP process, his sensitivity, or what I would say, just his connection to the will to live and God's selection, however it is, that he should go that path. So that's how some people survived. And this is consistent to the accounts that I read of the concentration camps. I've just been reading one. Back to our hiding place. My aunt joined us, one of my mother's sisters, the woman who's single. The farm family knew that it was dangerous. All of their neighbors would, and this is the question that someone asked, all of the neighbors would object to Jews being saved. At the later time, it was very certain that there were certainly a number of people in that village who would denounce them, would cause our death, would cause them either to be shot immediately or sent to a concentration camp, and the land divided among the people who denounced this. So it was very for them. I mean, it was life-threatening for them from the beginning. They hid us by putting us in a cellar. The entrance to the cellar was within the house, and you could lift up the deck and go down the steps, and we were in the cellar. There were cracks in the wood floor. It wasn't a very well-built house. It was a farmhouse. And dust settled down, came down there. Whenever anybody came down, dust came down. We'd sneeze. We didn't, but sneezed. And so after a few weeks, it was clear that, and the tension was intolerable. It was very frightening to be there. And so it was clear that we had to find another place. And what Stash Vrubel did settled on is that he was going to dig a pit. I mean, he engineered it, and he executed it. He dug a pit that was the size of two of these tables. I mean, this table doubled, and about 30 inches in depth. Not enough for an adult to sit up. For a 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid, it was okay to sit up. I could brush the roof. He dug that, I think, in one night. He then very carefully distributed the earth that no one would see that there was a pile of earth, and what was he doing out in his... the place he decided is the former pigsty, which was a lean-to by the barn. And he dug that so that was sort of a shelter. He dug it, covered it with boards, covered it with dirt, with straw, and with dirt, and with more straw. There were no more pigs there, just us. We got in there, and we stayed there for 2 years, 2 months, till January 1845. I remember only one time that we got out. By that time, by January 45, I could no longer sit up because it was so shallow. My parents never could sit up. My aunt couldn't. We all just lay 4 people side by side. And there was no light. I brought some light in. I can tell you about that. one night, somehow, we just, after maybe 6 months or so, we were so pressed that, and somehow courageous, that on one dark, moonless night, we'd arranged with Stash that we crawl out, and this lean-to was next to the barn, and walk around in the barn. And there was a horse kicked me in the groin, and decided that that wasn't very safe. Even that wasn't safe enough. So that was the only time I know that we left there, and it was that one night. And our excrement he removed. Well, what he did is he came to the barn with his milk pails. In the milk pails he had food, soup that they'd cooked last night, bread. They slaughtered an animal, usually a pig, once in the spring. In the spring, the potatoes were stored in the ground, frozen, and during the winter they froze. And frozen potatoes, when they get cooked, are just horrid. They're sweet. They shared with. They lived subsistence farmers. There were 3 people in that family. There was also a servant girl. They shared all that they had as subsistence farmers with 3 other people and a child. So they basically have their provisions. We gave them in increments. The war was going to end just any time, another few weeks. We gave them all the money that we had, that we'd taken with us. And then, well, I'm sure there'll be more questions of how we survived and what we did and how we occupied our minds and what that experience was like. But someone asked that already. And for me, those 2 years, and my best image for that is that it was that a seed, like a seed's put in the ground. Well, children between 7 and 9 are very active and exploring, but I was germinating. This normal process of development was altered. I was put back into some womb-like condition, and and that's what I had. I had my imagination to work with. Could develop. Because I succeeded in bringing a little bit of hours of the day into there, I could develop some intellectual skills. I learned the alphabet to read, and I learned to memorize the multiplication tables. But mostly I fantasized, and that that passivity has led to a certain characteristic way of dealing with life and circumstances and consequences in my life and my family and the crises I've had. Still trying to investigate it. The best way of investigating is being with John and some other people and Bernie at Jerry Jampolsky's home. That's, I don't know whether... I have some generalizations, and then I'll look at these questions again and see whether I can address some more of them more thoroughly. I think we survived. I think that other people survived from my contact. I can't generalize that well. There was a great will, a will to make it, a will that's more than a mental will, and more than an action will, and more than an emotional will. I think I started by saying that. And this will enveloped me and my family and organized our conscious, intellectual, emotional, and psychic process toward making it. And there's something, something that says we will make it. I thought about this some more, and I said, well, maybe it's like what Carlos Castaneda writes about different realities, and it's another level of reality, that kind of will. It's different than the ordinary way that I have of talking. The Japanese have a word for it, Yamato Damashi. It's a singleness of purpose which overcomes all obstacles, and it blinds one to the hazard and the obstacles. Yamato Damashi. Another part that I didn't speak much about, and that survival was part of being conscious as Jews. In every contact that we had, and in context of other accounts, in that relationship, there was always a question whether the person that we're approaching or who's approaching us is Jewish or not. And if he's Jewish, just how strong is his identification with core values of Judaism? And so survival was somehow connected with you could trust people who are deeply Jewish in their values. That's my prejudice. I mean, that's a prejudice, I think, that could operate for many survivors. They knew that they could count on someone who's committed through all the values that comes from millennia of religion. They're solid at the core. And I think survival has to do with knowing that, knowing that you have some purpose, some great purpose, something that you want to perpetuate, you carry through, you bring about something that's connected with that sense of will, but that has at the end of it some aim, some purpose. I think that very few people could articulate what their purpose was. As I think a bit to do with that middle reason that I said about being a Jew. Just because we're Jews and we have survived pogroms and inquisitions and massacres, we're going to make it. We're going to make it in order to save to straight that there is a remnant that remains. Now, I've talked a lot about Jewishness and Jewish values and Jewish orientations to survival, and I've asked myself the question: what does this have to do with Cambodia, Vietnam, Central America? What does that have to do with survival in Afghanistan? This villages, not whole nations. I mean, one can imagine somehow, if people or two people or one person dying, one's associate, one friend. One can imagine perhaps 150 people, perhaps there are 50 people in this room. I mean, that would be horrendous. Perhaps 1,000, I don't know whether you can imagine 1,000 dead. 100,000? 6 million? That was a slaughter. I mean, that was something strange in the world. But things happen of hundreds and thousands, and children come through that and come appear here. I haven't yet had the conversation with the survivors from other cultures. I don't know how much what I have and what they have is similar and what's different. And one of the things I'd like to see is, before I die, survivors are dying. I'm one of the youngest ones. I think I'm survivors in this room. I'm sure that I'm the youngest one. There's something else that I'd like to say that needs to be done. And that I said that I was a zombied, crippled. Though I'd done engineering and I'd done social sciences and gotten a Ph.D., had a fellowship in France and Rome, and done a lot of these things. The reality of it, I was very close to those people that I did recognize, are somehow frozen from that experience. They were very powerful, very successful, sensitive, psychologically, psychically sensitive through that survival. They came out. I came out too. I guess I'd like to spend a minute telling you what happened when I came out of that hole on the night of January 18th, 1945. I wasn't very practiced at walking or running, we were concerned that if we did it at night, because we were concerned that the Poles or the other people might still want to be rid of the Jews who survived, who lived, and though we weren't afraid of Germans or Russians, we were still afraid of the Rubel's neighbors and anyone else we might meet. So we waited till it was late at night and dark and gathered outside the Rubel's house. And my parents were discussing just where and how they would go back to my grandfather's house a few miles into the town, back to the town of Opočno. Now, I had spent 2 years, imagine a kid for 2 years, with his parents without a moment away. I split. I left. I left in the middle of that night. I left them, they didn't know where I went, I didn't say anything to them. I'd had enough. And I had enough will or strength to go. And I had enough memory that I remembered a safe house that we stopped at and got out of the ghetto 2 years before. We went to one house and then we made it out to the Rubel's house. And as I remember, though it's not a very clear memory, the first place that I did was run back to the town and I went with my friends. And my grandfather, about whom I started talking. I didn't remember that a few years ago when I was talking with Robert Hall. So it's coming back. Rather interesting. What effect it had on me, I think it had a great deal, thank you, Bernie, it had a great deal to do with my strength in life. Like, there really isn't anything that can scare me. Not sort of financial poverty, though. Really. And it's on a pre-conscious level. It's not I don't remember ever saying this to anyone before, but I thought about it. That I really can... But it also takes... During those 2 years, I developed a sense... it did not develop a sense of appropriate risk. You know what a kid does? He does something and checks it and does it and finds out what the limits are. I had no practice in finding out what the limits were. That means that I do things, but they sometimes are off the wall. And I do extreme things because I've got this sense I can get away with the extreme. I mean, I can take it. Not that I can get away with it, but whatever the consequences are, I'll deal with them. Some of the other psychological consequences. I have when my fear, my pain doesn't run my life, I have a well-developed sense of compassion. It's just, I have a lot of feeling for other kids. I think I can get along, I can really get along with kids. And I think the reason, years ago, I knew that I was going to do what I did last month. I was going to work with the people that are profoundly retarded. On a very, adults on a very kid level. Can't feed themselves, some of them. What I've seen among survivors, and you might want to look out as you listen to the future panels, I wonder what your observations will be, is that there are survivors who survived by, in concentration camps, through some activity of survival, on and on every day doing something to make it. And there are some people who did enormous amount of activity and did just extreme actions. And 2 weeks ago, there was a lady sitting here on a panel who was among the partisans. And she used different imagery. She talked differently. She was more, in a different kind of way, present and interesting and attractive, at least least traumatized, least zombie-like. So I think, and then there are people who are in hiding. My being in hiding led to responding to many situations with a passivity. I mean, when something threatens, I'll just sit. Now, my wife will do something. And sometimes sitting is well, and sometimes doing things as well. But I will sit. I've got a lot of patience. That's another one, quality of patience. I read very much as one of my agendas, and that was the agenda for arranging and finding my way to Jampolsky's practice and home, and bringing these people, that we do something healing, and I believe, though there isn't anything in experience to show so, that there is a healing possible for most of those, not for most, but for many of those who are willing to approach the pain, to investigate it. There's a way of letting go of it. And in that house, a month ago, I brought an acquaintance, and for the following month he was radiant, this man. And so I have hope that somehow out of that small person group will come out some programmatic action. And you people who are somehow concerned may want to somehow use your imagination and energy and curiosity to find out how to deal with deeply traumatized people. Because I believe that they had great capacities at some time. They haven't dealt with the pain when the crisis has been over, other than just shutting down and functioning minimally, whatever that means. That when relieved of the terror, of the pain, those people have a great contribution, can make great contributions. Now, there is a notorious figure of Elie Wiesel, who somehow assimilated what he went through. But there are other people. One of those exceptional people is, I don't think, known by anybody or by many here. His name is Benjamin Mead. And he radiates energy, brought together. He was the organizing energy between bringing together 15,000, most of whom were frightened people, to that meeting in Washington that did so much for me and a lot for them. He brought and organized the political system of the United States so that the president was there, so that the Senate passed a resolution, so that piece of ground on the main boulevard in Washington, I forget where the museums are, a piece of land was dedicated so that a building will be put up as a museum, as a memorial place. That sort of energy is available to some of those survivors. Now, Benjamin Mead was a partisan, or he was 18 years old at the time of the war. I don't have much more. I have a lot more, whichever way you want to go about it. Do you have any questions, or let's see how I've dealt with the things you asked? No, what remains of these things? They're fragments. We've got about, I think, 20 minutes. Yes?
How did you manage to come to this state?
In 1946, in early 46, about 9 months after the war ended, my father's health he'd recovered enough health, and he'd started enough work serving farmers dyeing their wool that we had enough to escape Poland, cross on the freight train into East Germany, sneak that border, enter East Berlin, and made one of those trips that eventually we ended up in a displaced persons camp in Frankfurt, Germany, Salzheim. There were two brothers who left Poland, of my father's. One was in the United States and one was in Belgium. And he got in touch with both of his brothers, and also we considered Israel. At that time, Israel was a very explosive place, and we had enough of Yes, Bernie. Oh, thank you. Your lights. Signal.
Your
Yes.
Your family, is your family still alive?
My father, may he rest in peace, died 5 years ago. My mother lives in Los Angeles. And she's also damaged by this. And you see people sitting here who are survivors, who are the relatively rich people. You might want to organize a side project of this course to visit those people who don't come here. There are, I'm told, somewhere between 1,000 or 1,200 survivors in the Bay Area. There's a committee of remembrance which has an attendance of 30 or 40 people. That's the total organizational body for survivors. The other people don't want to make contact with the pain. Yes. Not quite. I left that ambiguous. It's that somehow we haven't done our work. And the rabbinic interpretation would be what you say, fellow precepts of Judaism. My view is that the history, our history, and our past has prepared us to communicate certain visions. And we have spent a great of life and of the nature of existence and of the nature of spiritual being, and that we haven't done that work well, and that the cons of us not having related in a giving and a contributing way, despite the great obstacles to the societies of the Western world, that we receive this kind of yes. We or they? What?
Is that not an extension of what you just said in regards to it fell away from the tradition, therefore will be punished?
Oh.
And is it not that the Christian or the...
Being corrected. I misled, or I misstated it. I think that God is gracious, wonderful. He creates the sun, the earth, the flowers, the springtime here, and love, and beautiful women, and all that, and then he guides us toward the best evolution for the universe, for the world. So that's my.
Is it not saying you said that if we as people don't do everything we can in order to save ourselves before we pray to God, is that...
I didn't follow. Say that again. Or what?
that unless we do everything we can physically before we pray to God for to be saved by God,
Mm-hmm.
God says, don't come to me. Don't come to me. My question is, are we of the fact or the doctrine of Christianity, especially, and from the doctrine of Judaism, saying, oh yeah, God will punish you if someone goes at
Yes, you can. We're stubborn. Yes.
You're mentioning the kind of the doctrine of survivors who are still traumatized. How do you suppose reaching these people? Sometimes people that are survivors refuse to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they look at me as a Gentile and say, why do you even care? Why are you so interested? And why don't you just forget that? And they don't have the show blog to study.
When they're ready is part of the answer, but what can you do? What can one do? I'm going to be exploring, investigating that. My first hypothesis, because the outgrowth of what I'm now is just the first stage of what I hope can come about. Is that if there is something that's safe enough, that's gentle, that's supportive enough. Though there were 15,000 people out of a population of 18, maybe 80,000 survivors in the United States that came to Washington. And great, I mean, it was made very easy for people to be there in many ways. I won't put in it was only in Washington that that great successful event happened. There was one in Los Angeles that was something of something very much different in quality. Benjamin Mead wasn't the one who was organizing that. He is organizing one in Florida next year at Hanukkah time. And whether you're a survivor or not, maybe there's room for you there. It may be an interesting thing to attend. He, I think, was part of organizing one in Israel. Bernie knows about that when I wasn't, years ago. One of the places that's safe is where there are other survivors. So that if you, so this a strategy is to provide a group of, or join, or facilitate a group of survivors who have a developmental aim, because it's safer, easier to believe that one's own people with one's own similar experience will listen. And that would be one way of seducing or inducing. That's at least one step. I think it's much more sophisticated, much more thought needs to go into that. And be glad to give you my number, or to anyone who wants to discuss that, the question of the traumatized people, because it's my question. I want to learn how to deal with it. Yes? I don't know. I don't know. I shot down a great deal. I have the strength that, though I had shot down, I did successfully well at school, that I was able to enter college and complete college. And at one point break down my college career, but then come back and finish it and go on and do the things I did. And somehow I could, you know, as I was trying to suggest, I think that my life's just beginning in some way, as I'm becoming more available to life. And this is a thought I had. Let's see. We've got 5 more minutes. So there are a few questions. One thought I'd like to indulge in. People speak of the nuclear holocaust. And that's the great thing that we need to protect ourselves from. And that the consciousness of that confines minds. Just forces thought into fear. I mean, people somehow fear that, and they're less of human beings because they're terrified and terrorized by that. I think that there are these genocidal holocausts that have happened. I haven't tried to make a catalog, but I'd say 6, half a dozen, between 1945 and now. They've been great war events that have stricken large population communities. And it's difficult to put it into words right now, because the thought was clear for me earlier, that I think that reality, that this world harbors that kind of energy, is destructive in a perhaps greater, but it's in some comparable way to the nuclear holocaust. Yes, we have bombs, but yes, we also are doing it right now. I have some thoughts as to just how to examine this question, but I'd like to answer questions. Yes? Yes. You described it well. I don't know what... Uh-huh. How? Your family? Yeah.
I didn't
She says that that she knows of people who did some enormously demanding and courageous things to survive, and now they're closed off to a lot of life. Is that accurate? Yeah. And what to do? I think that something can be done. I think that my friend Levi Stein, who was just exposed to some ideas, I have since decided that I will learn to speak Yiddish well enough to translate some of these ideas into Yiddish and produce some tapes. I've got this here. Jim Polsky has put his item of the simplest possible form, a little package of booklet called A Mini Course for Healing Relationships and Bringing About Peace of Mind. He's written a number of small books also. That sort of material is also, there's a cassette tape that goes with it. And I guess I can speak about mine and what I imagine. Just the pain, the fact that really there really isn't anyone, the reality is there isn't anyone else in the world except my mother. I mean, the rest of the people, zombies. It's you all that are speaking from that perspective that are zombies. I mean, the only ones who can really communicate, and the communication is painful between my mother and me. It's one aspect of it, one phenomenon is that the only reality is that intense reality of what I had to do, and there's no one else who shares that with me. And in some way, it's still important to keep that out, because what I did was so painful, and there isn't anything that has been good, really good, for one's soul. There hasn't been a true healing. Things that are healing. Now, what healing means, I can't right now. I mean, I can come back and we can talk about that, but that's not here. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm the psychotherapist, and I'd like to speak to you. Human organism can only tolerate what it can tolerate. And when you think too much on the emotional life, this is the way it is. We do this mentally, we do this by contracting the eyes, we do this by shutting down the body. And many Holocaust survivors experience it on various levels. When the trauma is gone, the person doesn't always simultaneously come back to full life. The body is still shut down, mind is still withdrawn. And it takes a lot of intense work, individual work and also group work, in order to almost reframe the person as they would have had the trauma.
Thank you. It's 20 to 6. Oh, yes.
The only thing I want to say,
Yes.
you have one speaker where we can say that the way you look, I have a feeling that I never had before in all the dozens of books I've read and the dozens of speakers I've heard over the years. Somehow you've got it across to me how you felt.
Thank you.
I don't know if the
Thank
other
you
people
very
felt
much.
that way.
Thank you very much.
Hey, the gentleman on the other side has his hand up for a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I can tell you the question.
Go ahead.
Okay, one thing
I don't need to leave.
is
Other people may. So go ahead.
I'm still unclear.
Yes.
You made a statement in the beginning which disturbed me a little bit. And let me preface it by don't understand the recent event that Parliament, I think in the State of Israel, using Israel, made the statement that the Holocaust was more or less verbatim was the Judaism gift to humanity. I could understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, but it's not for him to say that.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
I was
Or
under the
difficult.
impression that you went along with it, sort of.
Uh,
Maybe not a gift to humanity, but a lesson to humanity.
I don't know what humanity needs, but I think it's a very radical position among Jews. I don't that it's God's gift to Jews, whether they know how to use it or not. They have used it in some ways, but not very appreciatively. But it's a lesson. There were other.
Positive sense.
Yeah.
Well, if we carry it a little farther, maybe if someone would have had a way to stop it, they shouldn't have because the lesson hasn't been finished yet.
I don't know. According to Rav Schusterman, the man I was speaking of with Friday, it's not for. He doesn't think it's that this generation needs to answer the question that they have. That is, they don't need to answer the question. They can say, God, answer this question, because we're not going to answer the question that you put to us by giving us the Holocaust. He says there's not yet time to learn the lesson. He doesn't want to do it, he says. It's too painful. I think we're going to have a good conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
On the opposite that, to me what you're saying is the Jews are the chosen people, and God has said something particular to them, even though what you're saying is, it's just to me a slap in the face, that they didn't rise to the place that they should have, so
During the previous centuries, actually.
they suffered.
Yeah.
So,
Well, as to Jews being chosen into this wonderful world that we have, and I think the Jews have made a contribution, and I think there's more for them to make, because there's a very rich body of teaching and of lore that I think is only partly brought into effect. I think that the yeshivas of the study hall have been, that's the ethic, the core of Judaism is the study of the text. But they have been occupied with I really don't want to be pejorative about some of the things, but there have been other scholars. The greatest scholar for me of this century is Abraham Isaac Cook, the chief rabbi of Israel till 1936 when he died, from 1919. And he's been well translated into English. And he sets a direction. He makes great suggestions. And he's very, very radical thinker. Thank you. Thank you very much for... who are you?
I'm Carol Weiser. By
Pardon
the
me?
way, I'm Carol Weiser. I do a lot of the work like Robert Hall does.
Uh-huh.
Except that I'm Jewish.
Uh-huh. Okay.
As a matter of fact, John Steiner and I are doing a class group here in the fall for
Really?
survivors and their families.
Oh, wonderful. What a wonderful venture. Yes. Tell me, let me know when. I'll give you a card.
I'm sure
Okay.
publicity will go out.
We'll get there. Okay, great.